Okay, let's start and burn off some fat here. This image. I find it actively unlikely this was meant to be Cassidy for several reasons. Primarily the release order event. The survival logbook came out in December of 2017. The Fourth Closet, the book where we get our only other appearance of a Cassidy, would be in June of 2018, 6 months later. In said book, Cassidy is barely mentioned, simply described as a girl with long black hair. It's not even really stated what character she possesses. Hell, Gabriel isn't even name dropped in the original novel and doesn't even have a description of what he looks like other than having a black shirt with white stripes. This already makes the case for this logbook kid being Cassidy a little shaky for a few reasons. While this is indeed a girl with black hair, the very crucial detail of long black hair is notably missing. This is at most ear-length hair. It's also 2 pigtails, which is a pretty notable descriptor that's not here in the original novel. And I specified the original novel because the graphic novel also messes this up. In fact, it's pretty much unrecognizable between the two. And yes, while novels do take a long time to make, I have no doubt they had enough time to fix this detail if this was the art they were working with. It's not only 6 months from release, but also the logbook had to be in development for some time before that, which meant this image must have existed prior to the logbook for at least a month or 2. And supposedly some of the books have had alterations made to them prior to release. So the fact that there were 6+ months already makes this difference a little bit more noticeable to me than it would be otherwise. If this was something where the 2 books came out at the exact same time, I could see something getting caught in the shuffle or something getting poorly communicated between the 2. It's also not like there's a lot of Cassidy to change. Like with Charlie's description, if you wanted to, say, make her look a little bit more like her game description or vice versa, you would have to actively go back and change prior books or retcon the description. However, this is a character who appears twice in the entire book. You have like a collective sentence to change in this entire book. If they wanted to link these 2 together, they could have easily made novel Cassidy have the same description as this kid. This is even more egregious to me because Susie's design is actually pretty good when it comes to describing the fruity maze Susie. This leads me to believe that this description or this image was already made and in effect when the Fourth Closet was being written. Which then makes the fact that this image, the art you would be referencing of the character presumably, I don't know why you would make up a design for a character who has official art, is just wrong in the Fourth Closet for some reason. And then there's the fact that 2.5 years later, not only will the graphic novel get the novel design wrong, but it will be completely unrecognizable from this original design. Once again, there is a reference image. Susie's design, once again, is relatively close for what it is. It just is actively bizarre that this image would not be used as a reference. Like I said, this isn't something where something was developed at the same time, where 2 things had to coexist time-wise. If this was meant to be Cassidy, then this is a notable error in design twice. And part of why I emphasize the description being wrong, even though it is a girl with black hair, is when you take this kind of wiggle room, you can make arguments for almost any character being any character. This is the same thing that happens with like, a blonde character? Elizabeth? Vanessa? Likewise, Drowning Girl isn't necessarily Cassidy, even though it was a common theory when that book first released, the in-universe context just heavily implied against it. And to be honest, if we are just running with these ideas that loose, you could make a case that this is supposed to be Charlie by that logic. Not saying it really is meant to be Charlie, I'm just saying, like, if you're going to argue this is Cassidy when the only criteria is black hair and girl, Charlie has enough stuff to go with. Not only does she have the Puppet Association and the Happiest Day Association, but also Charlie will later on be depicted with having pigtails in the graphic novels, which could theoretically imply in this magical wonderland that this is the art that was used to make this Charlie design in the graphic novels, which like I said was drawn several years later, and just allocating for the novels having Charlie with brown hair instead of black hair. Seems like she has black hair in the Fruity Maze, but who knows what the hell's going on there. I don't know if Scott deliberately changed the hair color in the Security Puppet for the sake of differentiating Charlie from the Aftons, or if this is just a weird quirk of the pseudo grayscale the Security Puppet minigame is in, but then there's like a lot of things that are in color, and brown doesn't even stand out that much in this minigame. And even if this is just a quirk of grayscale, this is clearly dark or near black hair instead of frizzy light brown hair, which is supposed to be how her hair looks in the novels, which then does make me wonder if this is supposed to be black hair exclusive to this continuity. What I'm getting at is, you could make all of the same arguments with Charlie. Hell, Charlie has the advantage of actually being in the game continuity with dark-colored hair and the puppet connection. That's more confirmed details than Gameline Cassidy has by a mile. Or maybe more like 40 yards. it's actually not that much because there's not much to go off here in general. Like, yeah, you could really tunnel vision on happiest day. Or you could realize that later in the logbook it's shown that the puppet is an example of a character who delivers cake and presents to children. And this is just an archetypal role of the character that could just exist in universe. Like, this very well could just be a meta thing where it's like, in universe it's just an image of a puppet giving cake to a kid. But to us, the audience, we're like, oh, happiest day, wink. Hell, this exact same kind of crap happened later on in the franchise. People saw this girl, Amelia, who had pigtails in GGY, playing Fruity Maze, and then saw this Ruin teaser. Hell, this became a Raitos video. And this was moderately popular. It wasn't like a universal assumption, but a lot of people assumed that this was going to be her guardian, Chica, and this was going to be like the modern interpretation of Susie, like the next generation of kids, if that made sense. And in a way, the pieces all were there. In fact, I would argue there was more association with Amelia and Fruity Maze to this girl than there really is between Cassidy and this kid. Hell, at that time, we thought this girl was going to have blonde or bright colored hair because of the lighter highlights the black and white filter gave. However, we now know this was just a lot of assets falling into the wrong place at the wrong time to create wrong associations. This would be a different story if Cassidy personally acknowledged this moment and was like, it will happen someday, this is for me, or I can't wait for this, or something like that would imply that this moment is directly tied to Cassidy personally. But it's not that, quite the opposite. The phrase on the page is, do you remember your name? Which, if anything, implies that association and identity of the bite victim is with Happiest Day, not Cassidy personally. If Cassidy was like, this is me, or it's me, or something like that on this page, that would be different. But it's not that. We don't have the proof that this was meant to mean this is Cassidy, and this is about Cassidy receiving Happiest Day that we would need for this page to be a confirmation of that. I want to get that out of the way because I feel like this is pointed to way more than it really should. So let's start bringing back in some fat to this greater approach and context so I can explain this theory a little bit more in depth. I want to make it clear that it's not the idea of Cassidy receiving Happiest Day itself that I have the problem with. It's all of the theories that seem to be attached to that concept to explain it. Especially in the context of the modern story, getting from point A to B here just feels like it's so overwritten relative to other theories, such as it being the bite victim's happiest day. I can get behind theories that are not straightforward. Sometimes being simple and straightforward does not adequately explain the details the way you need for a theory. This is part of why I like Michael Runaway over some theories like the kidnap-centric Midnight Motorist theories, because while they do explain some parts in a simple context, they don't explain the entire minigame well, or at least I've never seen one that really felt like a deep answer to the overall minigame. I'm also going to try and avoid the narrative focus on this that I sometimes will bring into a theory when I feel like it's relevant. However, I can judge it if it sounds unwritable. What I mean by that is, Scott Krav Maga actually has to write this story. It has to somehow be formulated in some format. Okay, so for some ground rules, a sort of control variable, what a default bite victim happiest day storyline would be like. Kid dies due to Diner Bear. Ghosts later help him find friends and peace, and he gets the party he never got because he was bit by Diner Bear. This happiness helps him free some other traumatized souls, as established in the Frights books. The party location is where he was mortally injured. We're basically undoing that event. This is the point where everything gets screwed up for him, and we are undoing that point so he is now free. In a way, you could argue it's his unfinished business, the party he never got. That is fundamental ghost mythology and rationale, and in a series that establishes that if you can move on, you can drag other souls with you, that is more than enough to help him free other kids. He has constant association with Fredbear, between his plushie and actually being bit by Fredbear, so him wearing the mask of Fredbear would come full circle here. It also means he ends up standing where Fredbear stood when it bit him, and where he was when he was bit. If we're going for the unfinished business thing, it would also have a symbol of like, hey, the other kids at his party wore masks, he never got to wear a mask. Wearing a mask is a symbol of him accepting the party and moving on. Charlie bringing in cake is also an essential part of the birthday. At the end of the day, kid gets his happy party he never got, moves on and brings other kids with him, Mazel Tov. The first hurdle for this being Cassidy is how much FNAF 4 and World really obsess over the bite victim being linked to Happiest Day. I will put you back together. You must leave breadcrumbs for him to help him find his way. The pieces are in place for you. All you have to do is find them. Rest. Now, pretty much no matter how you interpret the Happiest Day minigames, there are some core concepts that are universal here. Breadcrumbs that you are leaving for him to help him find his way are the Happiest Day minigames. That's what you actually do in FNAF World when you do the clock minigames. You set up those minigames. That means when you create/enable/set up whatever exactly what we're doing in FNAF World, when you're doing that, you are making it so he can find his way. Now that forces Cassidy-centric Happiest Day theories to try and fit those lines into this narrative. This is, at least what I suspect, made Shatter Victim such a popular version of Cassidy Receiver overall. It's really one of the few, if not one of the only ways, at least one of the only ways that got popular, to make these lines work with receiving Happiest Day. The idea that Shatter Victim tends to run with, there's some variation in how people explain the theory, is that the bite victim is split into pieces, I will put you back together, and then doing the Happiest Day minigames assembles the bite victim, which somehow enables Happiest Day to happen. Once again, the exact details kind of change from person to person here. I'm going to focus on Shatter Victim combined with Cassidy Receiver overall because it's the most common version of Cassidy Receiver. Shatter Victim infamously has the issue of how he can't really be split across the MCI kids themselves, because A, we don't even know if a soul can latch onto another soul, like, indirectly without having an original vessel. Like Andrew did, and I quote, get into William's soul, but it's kind of unclear what he was prior, depending on whether or not you link him to the new kid or not. And he also wasn't shattered when he did that. In fact, it's unclear if you can even shatter without being latched to physical vessels. And on top of that, the physical how gets even weirder when you have to link it to the actual robots. I mean, it's one thing for him to, like, possess the plushie he died near, or, like, his soul will haunt the brother who killed him, basically. Like, both of those have some physical, like, logic. Mike was there when the bite victim died. The plush was there when the bite victim died. Firstly, not only does he have to connect to robots he did not die near at all, but also he has to connect to 4, 5, 6 different robots, depending on who's telling the story. Once again, theorists kind of change it each a bit. And also, why? Like, him attaching to Fredbear has, like, the loose logic. So you could argue, like, oh, maybe he's connected to it permanently in a kind of a karmic sense. There's really no reason other than his plushies fading away that you could ever link him to the main animatronics. And also, we would need to confirm that the Freddy's 83 location was already a thing and was not opened after Fredbear's closes. I mean, we have no way of knowing that for sure for now, but if it is ever confirmed that Freddy's 83 opened because Fredbear's closed or something like that, the Shadow Victim just adds in a whole other level of how the hell. Okay, even saying he is, even giving him that he somehow gets split across 5 vessels, 4, 5, 6, once again, kind of changes depending on the person. This doesn't even really make sense with how shattering worked in the 4th closet. So they were literally split across multiple bodies at this point in the novel. There's the original amalgam where they're all mixed together. The original amalgam is now put into the Fun Times, and they have some agency and control over the Fun Times. They are just tricked by Afton into being relatively obedient. So this is a very physical explanation of it. This is not like a weird loosey-goosey soul thing where the soul just magically flies apart into multiple pieces. They were literally combined into one thing, and chunks of that one thing were put into other things effectively. So Shatter Victim is now just making up a new rule that a soul can just shatter from nothing. Even with Andrew splitting, he literally was attached to chunks and blood of Afton that spewed everywhere inside of a Fazbear distribution center. This character is in one thing that goes into multiple things when it breaks apart. The novels also ruin this narrative even more in the case of Happiest Day, because as the spirits and pieces of them get assembled, they become more coherent and complete. When they're fully there and Carlton is able to remind them what Afton did to them, they're fully sentient and able to kick Afton's ass. And they're also physically there from Carlton's point of view. I mean, sort of, not really, you get the bit. He can see them is the point. Why I emphasize that he can see them is there's no version of that happening with Happiest Day. Despite putting more and more pieces together, there is no point in which we see a crying child get assembled or become tangible. He remains completely invisible through the entire Cassidy Receiver narrative with Shatter Victim. I find that a bit problematic for Cassidy Receivers because there's no, like, updated, fixed version of this concept. Like, with Security Puppet, where the lore clearly changed or developed new details from what Scott originally planned, they were shown to us and laid out bare open in a new updated version of the minigame. There's no time where that happens really here. We don't get to see a fixed Happiest Day that accounts for the bite victim being there. In fact, you could argue Shatter Victim is brownie points for bite victim receiver, where he's able to put on the mask once he is fully assembled, him having his identity again. That would be your progress when you have all the pieces put together. However, when it's Cassidy, there is is no progress. There's no even proof he was there in Happiest Day. If it was like, hey, we have the 4 kids and then we're like making them more tangible or like putting the masks on them when they're already there in Happiest Day, that's one thing. But they just aren't there until we do whatever exactly we're doing. Once again, going back to the physical aspect of it, where literal machines were being taken apart, melted together and all that, in a way, we're kind of going against what the novels were going for. If the conflict is that every time William extracts a bit of the MCI kids from the Molten Freddy amalgam thing and injects it into a new thing, the pages fly apart and break apart and they become less tangible and coherent, then isn't that effectively undone by the creation of Molten Freddy and Ennard? The MCI kids should all be assembled when that happens under normal Molten MCI and Shatter Victim. At best, there's a piece missing in Charlie, and we'll get on that later. But the way Happiest Day plays out according to Shatter Victim is that they're still mentally messed up. The pages are still split apart for some reason. They still need to be brought together, but for what point if the novels are the rules we're working with here? If it was something like the Bite Victims in a separate vessel, whether that be Golden Freddy under Molten MCI Alter S, or him possessing the Bite Victim, or him possessing the plush, or even something like Free Victim where he has no concrete attachment, if he is in something else other than the MCI kids' souls, that would explain why he would be the anchor point in this entire minigame or collection. Other things need to be brought to him. He can only go to one MCI kid at a time unless they're all brought together somehow in some format. If they all have to be brought to one point from other things, then we have a conflict going on. We have a thing to do in Happiest Day still by the events of FNAF 6. I also find the idea of Charlie having a piece of the Bite Victim not fully contradictory, but questionable, and it creates a noticeable plot hole in the storyline, especially with Frights, which is Jake was able to find most of the pieces of Andrew because he had one chunk with him. It was a combination of searching through Andrew's memories and some sort of general ability to find him that's kind of unclear because they all went to different locations after the Fazbear Distribution Center, so it's almost more like an ability to track them inherently. It was through that he was able to find those pieces. However, if Charlie has a piece of the Bite Victim, you think she would have found and or freed Molten Freddy way sooner. We know from Frights that you don't need a fire to free souls. You just need one soul that can leave its vessel to take other souls with it. That would mean, despite being the only missing piece of the Bite Victim, and having the inherent ability to track the other characters for years, never succeeding. However, if Charlie's requirement is not a literal, I am a chunk of this physical equation, and more of a moderator sense, like, I need to be there to make sure the party can happen, yeah, it's kind of silly that she never found them. However, in the case of her having a piece, that means she had an active, living, tracking part of them in her for so long. Charlie also raises a lot of questions for why the Bite Victim's soul attaches to what it does. A lot of times, the loose explanation to why the Bite Victim would attach to the main characters is something about the plushes and the bullies or something like that. It's still not really explained on a mechanical level that well, but there's some thematic association at play here. However, Charlie has none of that. There is no bully that Charlie represents, there is no puppet plush, or him even having any on-screen time around the puppet, or really any appearance of the puppet in FNAF 4. And that opens up the question of, if he doesn't need to be associated with the bullies or the plushes to latch his soul onto something else, then why does his soul not attach onto Spring Bonnie at all? What's really separate from Spring Bonnie and the puppet and the other characters? If Fredbear / Golden Freddy can be latched onto to some extent, why is Spring Bonnie magically immune from this process? I'd also raise the question, does put back together mean what we're saying it would mean for this theory? Elizabeth makes this entire discussion murky when it comes to the phrasing of put back together meaning split across other souls. Because Elizabeth isn't put back together by something like Happiest Day, where we're going from memory to memory and collecting them all into one place to move on. Put together by Mike by the events of Sister Location, which is either just by scooping or by being put into Ennard. Yet Spooky Eyes in FNAF World implies the Bite Victim is not put back together yet. That promise is still being made, and even at the end of the game, it doesn't fully seem like he's been assembled. If he was literally broken, that is, as in split across multiple things. The pieces are in place for you. All you have to do is find them. So if it was the same thing as Elizabeth, where she was in some way not herself until the events of Sister Location where something physically happened like scooping or being assembled, then that's all happened to the Bite Victim. Not only was he assembled when Ennard was formed also, or at least mostly assembled, but also the pieces are still out there to be found at this point in time. Yeah, they're in the right place, but what does that exactly mean? Does this mean that he's fixed / put back together? What is he supposed to find after the events of FNAF World? Why are his memories still split across the other kids at this point in time? If he's not put back together, then that means we're completely unrelated to the events of Sister Location now. Being put back together is just a separate process for the bite victim than what it was for Elizabeth. I know I've been really hard on Shatter Victim in particular, and to an extent that's really just because it's probably the most popular version of Cassidy Receiver out right now. Now, calling it purely a Cassidy Receiver thing is misleading. It'd be like me saying Multi-MCI Alter S is only a vengeful Cassidy thing. That said, it does play into that argument a lot, and I just have problems even in a more neutral stance with it in the bite victim. I can see it a little bit better then, because at least that's closer to what the novels had, where we're putting someone together bit by bit. It still doesn't quite add up to me, but it's like there's an objective there, you know? There's a thing going on there. But it feels like Shatter Victim is a little aimless when it comes to applying it to Cassidy. It feels like it creates this big promise of the bite victim being split across the kids and being this ultimate goal to work towards, but then has the payoff be 5 kids who we don't really know his direct association with. Whereas the bite victim receiver, it's his payoff first and foremost, and that payoff allows him to take other people with him. It's helping an innocent kid get his birthday. Like I said, it's ghost mythology. It's unfinished business he finally gets to complete. However, I do have more general problems with Cassidy Receiver overall. Like I said, the main obstacle of Cassidy Receiver is applying the bite victim to its storyline. Because now we have all this dialogue and shit we have to fit in there. And I feel like we're throwing in a lot to try and justify that context regardless of how we get there. There aren't many versions of Cassidy Receiver I see that don't involve the bite victim's memories are used to somehow free the MCI kids. Shatter Victim's a popular way to do that, but a lot of them operate under that assumption. However, with everything I've experienced in the series, I just don't see that being the intent right now. While there is a level of MacGuffin-ness to how things are handled, there's a lot of weight placed on memories and soul and all that. However, the way the bite victim's memories are used in this theory just don't really click with that moral. It plays a mechanical role in the freeing of souls, but it doesn't really play a narrative or emotional role in it. The MCI kid standing in the place that the bite victim died and celebrating cake almost feels a little tone deaf when it's them and not him. If he's celebrating in the place, that implies, like I said, it's come full circle, he's moved on, he's content. However, this isn't their curse. When they celebrate here, it's just a set piece. It's a set piece that has a lore reason, in quotes, but it feels like every time I've seen this talked about, it's just that. Likewise, the kids being in the various memories of the bite victim or things associated with his memories similarly kind of falls flat on this interpretation. Bite victim receiver gets the benefit of these being his memories used to connect to him, and likewise his way of reaching back out to them. Under Cassidy receiver, it's someone else's memories being used to connect to Cassidy. It's once again MacGuffinized. It says memories are just out there and used like they're the fucking Chaos Emeralds. It doesn't really fit the tone of souls and memories in the novels and books. In the novels, it was literally their ability to understand what was happening being stripped away from them, being reduced to being obedient to William. That was awful. It's shitty. In Fright, Andrew's agony just makes things worse. Andrew's trauma just makes things worse. Yet on the other side of the coin is Jake with his love and compassion, which is deep-rooted in him via memories and just his overall history and personality. That allows him to move on and pursue helping other people. That's what those memories meant there. While they had some level of mechanical relevancy, it was more than just a convenient way to have the plot happen. To kind of put in perspective how weird this overall narrative is, imagine if instead of it was just Jake frees Andrew after finding all the things Andrew's agony and soul had latched onto. Instead, imagine if Jake had to assemble the pieces of Billy Bob Jenkins, traumatized first grader who was kicked off a cliff by a goat and now has goat trauma. And then Jake, in the spirit world, brings Andrew to a goat field on a cliffside, and they celebrate by kicking stuff off a cliff, and they both move on, and then it is never really addressed, or at least only loosely alluded to, that Billy Bob Jenkins might have moved on himself. If the entire idea was always just the bite victim is split across the MCI kids, then why Fredbear's of all things? Why have him die at Fredbear's? Why have Fredbear's layout be an inverted happiest day? Why have his bullies wear masks when bullying him? Was that really required? Hell, if this was the plan, if the idea was always he is going to split across these vessels and then be brought together mentally or physically or whatever, why not have him die at the 1985 Freddy's or have him die at the 1987 Freddy's? Hell, If Shadow Victim was the intent, the 1987 Freddy's would make so much more sense. In that location, we have the toy animatronics who are possessed by a collection of parts used from the original animatronics. Especially Mangle, who has been torn apart and put back together more than any other character, and thus likely would have more parts from the original animatronics than any other. Mangle is the one that goes down from the ceiling with the bite animation. That could explain the bite of 87. I mean, hell, already the Happiest Day minigames have a lot of FNAF 2 imagery. Just have a cutscene where, oh, we see Golden Freddy still was used in this location. We can see Fredbear walking around. Then quite literally, every Happiest Day minigame is accounted for. We can just say, oh, okay, the final Happiest Day shot is its own unique magical ghost zone. Who cares where it is? It doesn't matter. The bite victim being bullied and the bite victim splitting across vessels has nothing to do with Fredbear's itself. In fact, it actively makes it harder and more confusing to happen. Instead, he dies because of an injury he got from Fredbear's family diner. From Fredbear, with his favorite plush Fredbear that follows him all around. This is like the most important, crucial thing in his storyline. This is the climax of it, the building point, the breaking point. While you can make this work to some extent, the emphasis on Fredbear's and making it Fredbear's family diner makes this resolution a clearer through line. But with Cassidy Receiver, the entire Fredbear's plotline is basically just a red herring under this version. There are some other generic arguments people make for the sake of Cassidy Receiver that I just don't think really have a lot of weight to them. For example, FNAF 3's original story was clearly about the fifth missing kid being Golden Freddy. I don't even disagree with that per se, but at the same time, Scott has stated the series developed details that weren't originally planned. And for this video, I'm not arguing what the storyline of FNAF 1 through 3 was. I'm arguing about what this kid's storyline would be. And it feels like with every piece of media we got later, it doubled down on the Happiest Day angle. But tying it all to Cassidy just seems frankly overwritten for a questionable payoff. You just need to accept so many things that are not established as possible rules to be the case. And even that would be fine to an extent if this was argued as like a crackpot theory, if this was something that was said to be like out there. Like, what if it's still about Cassidy and the bite victim's just somehow a part in assembling the Happiest Day? Hell, just to go back to the whole put back together thing, it really is a weird concept. The bite victim is described as broken before he even flatlines, and I will put you back together is said before he flatlines. That would imply whoever the plush is already knows he's broken. For broken meaning split apart multiple animatronics and vessels, and I will put you back together meaning assembling those pieces, that the plush will somehow have influence over that, which weirdly enough really kind of rubs into Cassidy Alter M territory. Or it means those two phrases just aren't about literally being broken apart. To me, Cassidy Receiver struggles to explain what it really does better. It has some of the more basic things to go with, like, oh, this image, which is probably talked about way too much, way too long, honestly. And clinging to, this kid can only ever be the spirit who possesses Golden Freddy, and that can only be Cassidy. But in my opinion, the bite victim has so much association with Fredbear, and his story is so tied to Fredbear, that this being him really isn't that much of a stretch to me. Does he possess Fredbear automatically? I don't know, but I don't think it would be weird for him to wear a Fredbear mask in this instance. Or at least, Cassidy Receiver makes me ask so many questions about its plausibility and how it would work, that to me, it's easier just to say, fuck it, this kid wears a Fredbear mask, because Cassidy Receiver needs to work around the bite. And all of the ways it's tried to do that for me just don't succeed in explaining it. A lot of the problems with Shadow Victim are the same kind of problems you could argue for other theories, but amplified to the extreme. Yeah, you could argue Golden 2 has the issue of why does he possess or link to Fredbear when he didn't die around Fredbear. But at least that one has the association thematically. He's bit by Fredbear. He spends a lot of time around Fredbear's family diner and his main plush is Fredbear. But with Shadow Victim, not only do you have to have his soul attached to something he didn't die near, it has to be 6, 5, question mark somethings, most if not all of which are in a separate location he isn't shown to be around on the screen. Any one of those would be a more extreme assumption than him possessing Fredbear, and it's all of that at once, and he magically flies into pieces for some reason. And there are just some parts of Shadow Victim and Cassidy Receiver I can't agree with how they're often presented. At least not without some change in the narrative they're implying. But after all, very strongly implied in 2 scenes that the bite victim is actively a part of Happiest Day in terms of setting it up, or at least has some active thing he's doing in the storyline. You must leave breadcrumbs for him to help him find his way. We are still your friends. Pieces are in place for you. All you have to do is fine, though. That implies the pieces are something that this character that's being talked to, who is talked to with a quote that was said to the bite victim, is actively looking for something, actively has to find the pieces. We are leaving the breadcrumbs for him to help him find his way. At a minimum, that means Shadow Victim has to be adjusted to include somehow he is doing something in the storyline, like he's going around, maybe he's these characters in the minigame. But it's not typically how I see it presented. I feel like it's not that uncommon for a FNAF theory to actually make a bit of a leap of faith in logic or its assumptions of how it works. But Cassidy Receiver comes with this like price tag of other theories that need to explain why the bite victim wouldn't just be this kid. And those theories aren't just doing a leap of faith, it's more like a parkour of faith. And it just does not convince at least me personally that well. And I guess at the end of the day, all I can say really is, these are problems I have with this theory, and I guess people wanted to see my problems with these theories.